Welcome to the next episode of Runtime Regret. I have to talk about this because it's something that's haunted me for some 35 years in the industry, and it's something that happens at such frequency and with such disaster almost every time that it's unfathomable to me that this continues to happen. And that is the hiring of a CIO, Chief Information Officer, that does not understand technology. I have worked in so many organizations where at one point in time or another, they have hired a CIO that has never coded, never done infrastructure, never done telecommunications, has no concept of what it takes to do information security, has never developed an application, put anything into production. They're individuals that had what were essentially business roles, financial roles, operations roles. The CEO got sick of communicating with the geek in the corner, so they decided to hire somebody, put them in charge of technology, and that individual has no experience with what the individuals that actually implement the systems within the organizations do on a day-to-day basis. This is the worst idea decision point that you can make for a corporation, full stop. There is no exaggerating this. And you might not understand exactly why that is. The reason why it is just it's actually human nature. So look, at the end of the day, the CIO, he's not that individual, man or woman. They're not programming. They're not configuring routers for telecom. They're not building systems in data centers. They're not setting up VPCs. They're not creating cloud instances. That's not what they're doing. So you sit there and you say, oh, on a daily basis they're hiring people to do all of that stuff. So do they really have to know like what they're doing or not? And a lot of times individuals say, well, they, as long as they've got good business acumen and they understand how to manage a team and all these other things, it's perfectly fine. The problem with this is that every single time you've got a manager, and it really doesn't have to be IT, but IT is a very technical skill and it's almost in every organization today. But every time you have a manager that does not know what their staff does, like doesn't have any clue what their staff does, what it does is it allows individuals that are lazy or less competent or name 1,000 nefarious things that don't necessarily work very hard or aren't necessarily good at their job to get into positions, and that individual really has no idea whether they're doing a good job or a bad job. They have no idea if they're snowing them, and they have no idea if they're lying to them, exaggerating. They've got no concept of how many individuals they have to hire or fire. You can't go out and find this stuff in CIO magazine as to like your head counts. You can go talk to consultants, but their ideas in your company aren't going to magically line up exactly. You can get inferences ideas, but and benchmarks, but like it's still not going to be really accurate as to what your specific company needs. Now, look, I'm going to be very transparent. I'm actually one of the luckiest individuals I know in the IT space. I got out of college. There were no jobs back in '92 when all this stuff started. My first job, I was fortunate enough, I was an assembler programmer, and I was writing an operating system for the RISC architecture, and it was specifically used for machine learning devices. So, like very, very, very old stuff. And that company got sold to another company, Data General does not exist anymore. But essentially, I was fortunate enough that I started out as an assembly programmer, and then I became a individual that was working in BASIC, and then I was working on Windows NT, and then I went and started to work on C and some other programming languages, things that I knew from college. And then I migrated to a company where I took over telecommunications, but I was still pretty young. So telecom had just started, the internet had just started. This is like 95, 96. And I ran telecom, or I should say a part of telecom, the internet part of telecom. And I was also responsible for all of the firewalls, as well as a lot of the other networking stuff that was going on. And that allowed me to understand and figure out and have to learn from somebody else. One of my staff trained me on how do you configure a router, and how do you set up a firewall rule, and how do you open up ports, and how do you do packet sniffing, and all of the different router configuration stuff. Simultaneously, in that same job, I had to build a couple of servers because the individuals who were there did not know how to build the web servers that were required for the job, as well as database servers. I ran part of that operations capability, specifically the servers that administered that. Moved to a different company, had to administer more servers, so I got real hands-on, hardcore experience. I had to implement identity access management, some security software. I ran development organizations, and I was really lucky enough because, you know, I started out as a developer from college, and I've been doing that, you know, since I was a little kid. But I got a taste of telecommunications. I got a taste of telephony, like actually, you know, setting up telephone systems, as well as the networks. I got a taste of what it takes to run a data center. I got all these flavors. Most people don't have that. But the real cautionary tale is if you've got none of those things, if you've got none of them, and you are in the position of CIO, and you're managing a bunch of different groups of people who you have no idea if they're lying to you or not, like it's almost impossible for you to make the right decisions. And I'm going to leave you with one story. So this is a story. I was working for a very, very large financial institution that is part of a custodial bank. It's a long time ago. I had just started the position. I was leading a group of individuals that ran essentially what was their intranet technology capabilities. I had a guy come into me. I had a business partner of mine, basically a internal customer, call me up and say, like, we need this done on this date. It's got to be done very, very quickly, blah, 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 blah. And then I contacted the developer that had, you know, was doing it. And he basically said, well, hey, understand, let me write up what this is. This is not a simple change. I understand their needed sense of urgency, but let me write all of this stuff up, and let me sit down with you on Wednesday and let me know what it takes, what it's going to take to do. The problem is, this guy had just started working for me. He'd been working for me for like less than 2 months. So he had no idea what my technical capabilities were whatsoever. So I called another developer that worked for me, and I said, hey, do we have access to these files, to the systems, blah, 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 blah. I went and I wrote the damn thing myself. I had a little bit of help from him, the other developer that I called, because I didn't know how to access some of the systems. I didn't have the permissions to do certain things, but he got me all of that stuff in a couple of days. And by the time I sat down with this guy, I had already completed what needed to be done, because it was really a couple of queries and a couple of screens. It was nothing, but I knew what he was basically lying about when it came to the effort. And I let him sit and draw on the board all of the different steps that he believed he needed to take to get all this stuff done. And it was complete and utter nonsense. So after about 45 minutes of listening to this guy tell me that it's going to take him, 4 weeks to get it into a place where you could test it and blah, 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 I just said to him, I said, look, can I just show you something? And I pulled it up on the screen and I showed it to him, and I said, yeah. I said, and I'm not going to give the guy's name here because you never know when he's listening, but I said, yeah, he gave me access to the file system. I actually wrote it myself. I had his help to deploy it. It's actually in dev right now. You can test it today, but I'm not going to have you test it today. I'm not understanding what you thought you were doing when you were making these estimates or what you were trying to pull here, but like it's over. So needless to say, we had a reduction in force later on that year, and he was the first guy to go. Long story short, if I did not know, and I was not fortunate enough to have grown up in the career path I've gone, I would have listened to that guy. The business would have waited probably 2 months to get what they needed. He would have been, God knows, sitting at his desk playing Duke Nukem or Tetris. Who knows what the heck he would be spending his time on. I can't believe that he could have been that bad a developer that would have taken him that long, because it was, it was probably 5 or 6 hours worth of work total. It was just unbelievable. So, please, if you're a CEO, and I don't think CEOs are listening to me, but if you are a CEO and you are hiring a CIO, if they know nothing about technology, they've never written an application, if they've never set up a volume on Amazon in the cloud, if they've never run a data center, if they've never run wires for telecommunications or configured a router, if they've never dealt with security protocols, do not hire that person. Do not hire that person. You are really screwing yourself, your company, your shareholders. It's a bad, bad idea. I'm going to leave it at that. It's probably getting dark. You probably can't even see me anymore. But this is a massively important topic for anybody who's trying to run an organization. Thanks so much for tuning in to Runtime Regret, and I will see you next time. Take care. Hey GoPro, stop recording.